Session, and I guess I'll open by asking this question: is it a cup? Is it a mug? Is it a chalice? Is it Mary Magdalene? Is it a lost artifact that Tom Hanks is chasing down in the Da Vinci Code? Well, Trish and Evelyn are here to tell us it's not about any of those things. Quality of candidate and quality of hire are the holy grail, at least of talent acquisition. Please join me in welcoming Trish Healy, the GM and VP of RPO and Project Operations at FutureStep, and the Senior Director at the Korn Ferry Institute, Evelyn Orr.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Zachary, and thank you everyone for still participating this late in the afternoon. We just heard about tequila, margaritas, and beer, so we'll try and get you out of here as quickly as we possibly can. We have the privilege of presenting this afternoon on quality of hire, and it is a little bit of the holy grail of recruiting, and certainly it is one of the, if not the key metric globally that HR professionals, talent acquisition professionals, and business professionals still want us to address as a function. And so this afternoon, for the next 30 minutes or so, we'll try and entertain you with a little bit about quality of hire. So, as I said, number one metric, hands down, in a number of surveys that are conducted globally, quality of hire is the key thing that will address the business impact that talent acquisition can have on an organisation. It is the number two item for most talent acquisition professionals. The priority that we place and the importance we place on the metrics around quality of hire have never been more important. But what's really interesting and somewhat surprising is that whilst 85% of talent acquisition professionals agree that of its importance, only about 30% are actually measuring this metric. And so when we look around the room, we talk to our colleagues in the talent acquisition space, only 1/3, so 2/3 are not measuring this very valuable metric. Quite a bit of misalignment between what the business is asking and what talent acquisition can actually measure. But I think the most alarming statistic when you have a look at quality of hire is this one. And it basically says that in 50% of cases, hiring managers aren't sure about the decision they're making with a candidate. It's 50%. And 50% of candidates aren't sure either. So they're not sure whether they should join the organisation, even after they've been hired. That's alarming and something that we really need to address as a function. And so over the next 25 minutes or so, we'll give you some insight into the ways that we can improve quality of hire, but really the quality of candidate, both for the candidate and for the organisation. Just a little bit around how we're measuring quality of hire today. Number of different metrics, most of these you've seen before. For the more reactive or tactical talent acquisition organisations, or functions, we're actually using things like cost per hire, time to fill, all of the regulars. And then for the more advanced or optimised talent acquisition functions, we're seeing individual performance really come to the fore and tying candidate quality of hire to individual performance at, say, a 12-month annual review cycle. We're also seeing promotability come up more and more across our client base, where we're actually tying this to succession planning, to looking at A-grade talent, promotability, learning agility, etc. But what's really interesting about all of these measures that we have up here, they're all post-hire. They're all the things that we'll measure after the candidate joins the organisation. What if we could spend more time actually focusing on the candidate and knowing that the quality of the candidates that are coming through the funnel are actually of a high quality, to make sure that link then draws to when we hire them. So we all know in talent acquisition we're focusing on some of these aspects. So our budgets are being spent in areas of pre-hire activities to make sure we address quality of hire. We're spending more money on sourcing to make sure we find the right type of talent. About 23 to 28% of budget in talent acquisition is being spent on sourcing strategies. About 10 to 13% is being spent on branding, talent communities. But it's really interesting to note that only 6% of what we actually spend in talent acquisition goes to any pre-hire assessment to impact the quality of hire. Only 6%. So the types of assessments that we're spending that on is everything from skill checking, reference checking, looking at education, experiences, knowledge, past roles. In the US in particular, I'd probably say that a lot of this is done through the interview process as opposed to any type of pre-assessment. But what if we could look at the whole person and the picture of the whole person, including some of these attributes on the right? And what about all of these attributes on the left and dimensions? Everything from motivators to learning agility, to leadership style, to personality traits. If we could get this whole picture view of a candidate, we would actually get to the Holy Grail. And so I'm going to ask Evelyn to talk about it because we're there. We're certainly getting further along this path, and Evelyn will share some of the tangible pieces.
Thank you very much. I think it's very timely that we titled this Holy Grail given the recent Monty Python reunion, if any of you are Monty Python fans. So Trish did an excellent job of laying out the landscape here. It's not enough to check and see what the quality of hire is after they're already in position. So one of the things we've tasked ourselves with at Korn Ferry is innovating on our assessments and the intelligence that we can gain about candidates before a decision is made. In fact, before they even rise to the top of a screening pool or a screened pool. I'm with the Korn Ferry Institute, which is the research and development arm of Korn Ferry. And so for the past 2 years, we have been integrating all of our intellectual property from some powerful acquisitions we've made and looking at our data. And we're in an age of big data, and big data can be overwhelming to try to sort through. But once you do sort through it and you see the associations and you see things that are predictors, it's a very, very powerful tool. And so we have synthesized our data into a very simple model called the Korn Ferry 4 Dimensions of Leadership and Talent, which I'll show you now. These 4 factors are, they contain the elements that we know predict success for people at different levels of leadership, for different types of roles, for different organizational cultures. And we basically feel that we've gathered together the elements much like you would in a periodic table of elements. We've identified the things that matter most for success across many different conditions. Now, you'll notice there are 2 on the top, competencies and experiences, which are more observable. Those are more commonly addressed in a selection process because the skills and experiences are things you can interview for, you can look at a resume for. They are also the most immediate, they're of the most immediate concern because they impact performance in the current role, the role that you're hiring for. These are easier to observe and they're easier to develop. The traits and drivers, or the dimensions that I say are below the fold, are the dimensions that impact longer-term potential. These are important in certain situations when a company wants to select people for certain roles, but wants to retain them and grow them into other roles that either exist or may not even exist yet. Traits and drivers are harder to observe, and therefore they're harder to measure. So when we talk about the tangible versus the intangible, the below the fold dimensions are more on the intangible front. So I'm going to take a quick detour here and let you know how these were developed. So we developed our 4 dimensions of leadership and talent. I mentioned we've made some really exciting acquisitions in the last few years when we put together the power behind PDI Ninth House, Lominger, Decision Dynamics, and Global Novations, we end up with a treasure trove of data that we've spent a lot of time sifting through, and our PhDs have been giddy over. So we believe we have the richest data set on talent in the industry, over 2.5 million assessments of professionals and executives. And when we can link how someone's qualities appear in an assessment with whether or not they stayed in a job, how they performed in a job, whether or not the business indicators suggest that they were successful in a job, we are able to empower our assessments with predictive power. We, again, also have a top team of industrial organizational psychologists at the Korn Ferry Institute. We are a very strong team. So the assessments, and I know assessment sounds like kind of a boring thing to talk about, but our assessments, we've spent a lot of time focusing not only on the predictive power, but also on the user experience and on the ease of interpreting what information is coming out of our assessments. So you'll see a few samples as I go through. You can notice that the engagement levels on our assessment user experience are high. We have a higher percentage of completion rate on assessments compared to the industry average, and so we're very proud of that. I know that some people are concerned about assessments being a gateway or possibly reducing a talent pool because people drop off, and so that is a concern that we have laid to rest. So let me just take a brief tour through our 4 dimensions and give you a sense of what's contained in each of the dimensions. First, I'll tackle competencies. Competencies are the skills and behaviors that are critical to current performance. They matter today. They are being applied in your current role. They are things, they could be leadership skills, like dealing with ambiguity or directing others. They could also be technical functional skills. Competencies typically are measured with a 360 assessment or a behavioral interview, and we know that those are time-consuming ways to measure competencies and sometimes impractical, especially if you're outsourcing externally. You can't do a 360. We, with our scientists at Korn Ferry, have developed a self-assessment of competencies, and we have a proprietary method which is enabling us to not only make the experience less time-consuming, more efficient, but it also is a method that prevents the candidate from distorting their skills, what they're good at, what they're not good at, or inflating their scores. It's a proprietary method that we have developed, and you can see that this is a snapshot here, the screenshot of the assessment itself. It's a very simple choice that you have to make between statements about your skills, and this forced choice is at the core of our technology. Traits are, if you recall, they are below the fold. Traits are our personality characteristics that are really core to who we are. They are not necessarily permanent or predetermined, but they are harder to change and develop than competencies. What we've noticed in our research are that traits can impact performance tremendously, and we know that the way they impact performance varies by leadership level. So for executives, for example, we know that taking risks and being able to have tolerance of ambiguity is exceedingly important. For entry-level managers, we know that things like persistence and a need for achievement are correlated with success. So we see that variation. Depending on the role's requirements, we take in and understand what the role requires, what level the role is at, and based upon that, we can adjust dials up and down and determine what would be the optimal score for someone. So you can see here a snapshot of a sample report where we have laid out a benchmark based on input from our client of what the optimal traits scores would be, and you can see 2 candidates that are compared against that benchmark. Provides an easy way of comparing the data. Next, I'll address drivers. Drivers are also a below the fold, more core to who we are. They are the inherent values, the things that motivate us, the principles we live by. Drivers impact our choices. They impact our choices around our careers, the way we spend our time, what we prioritize, whether or not we're engaged in something, whether or not we feel like we fit. Drivers factor in tremendously into how someone fits in an organizational culture. So imagine someone who is driven by competition and they join a startup where collaboration is most valued. There's going to be a mismatch, or vice versa. There's going to be a mismatch, and that impacts engagement, which impacts performance, which impacts retention. So again, based on what we know from the client about what their culture emphasizes, we are able to set a clear benchmark or best-in-class profile and compare candidates against that optimal score. And again, you can see a sample report here where the gray is indicating the benchmark and the red is indicating the candidate's score. On the experiences front, this is a bit of a combination of art and science here. So we have industry experts, we have market experts that know what types of technical functional experiences are required for a specific area. We also have research that indicates that there are some core elements of experiences. There are some core things that help people along the way in their career. And so we know things like managing a strategic project, or getting high visibility, or managing through a crisis, or dealing with a people crisis. Those are kind of underlying elements of experiences that you're not going to see that show up in a job title, you're not going to see that show up on someone's resume necessarily, but we are able to interpret resume information and glean what types of developmental experiences are going to be most relevant for this person in their career and in the role that they're being hired for. So we go beyond just the resume and we combine that resume with our expertise and our research. So what I'd like to tackle next, Trish set up for us this challenge. If only 50% of hiring managers feel confident about the decision they're making, and only 50% of new hires feel confident that they're making the right decision, how do we get to a better place where we all feel more confident about where we are and who we're choosing to be on our teams? Well, in addition to investing a lot of time and innovation on the front end with the assessment, we're also partnering with our clients to gather data and make sure that what we are setting as our benchmark and our target is actually playing out with the outcomes that we're seeing. So I've got some outcomes research I'd like to share with you. And I'd like to suggest that perhaps outcomes research such as this can be where our confidence boost could come from. So the research I'm going to share is going to answer a couple of questions. And this was research that was done in partnership with one client in particular. It's a large security provider. We worked with them to fill 4 key roles. So the research spans 4 key job types, even though it was one client. We looked at customer service representative, contract services, collector, and product support specialist, just to give you a sense. And we asked ourselves, are we helping this client find the best candidates, the best fit? Are we getting those candidates into their positions faster? And are we helping to ensure that retention metrics are improved? So, we all know how much time and energy goes into businesses tracking business metrics. And we know that business metrics are a key driver for strategic decisions. At Korn Ferry, we really view talent as a strategic decision as well. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're basing it on real metrics, not just a gut instinct, not looking at it after the fact, but looking at it beforehand. All right, so the first study, we looked at fit. Now, I would suggest, I'm a cognitive psychologist by trade, and so decision-making and human judgment is something that's fascinating to me. I won't bore you with any detail, but human judgment is flawed. I'm sure you can all recall experiences where you had a really good feeling about a new hire, and once you brought them on, it just was kind of disappointing. So the recommendation we have, of course, is use science to improve our ability to make good judgments. And we do that through fit scores. So our fit scores are based on all the research I shared with you on the 4 dimensions of leadership and talent, all of the intel we have about what predicts success in different cultures, at different leadership levels, in different roles. We take in all of that information from a client, and we develop, to the best of our knowledge and the best of our ability, a fit score. You can see here that the fit scores are different. We customize them depending on the role. So what you see in figure 1 are the 4 job roles I described, product support specialists, et cetera. And you can see that the fit score is not always dependent on all 4 dimensions equally. And sometimes it's only dependent on a couple of the dimensions. So in the case of product support specialist, for example, the primary driver of the fit score and what was most important for someone being screened in as a good fit was traits and drivers, so things below the fold. Whereas other roles like contract services relied more on competencies to determine what good fit looked like. These fit scores are critical in how we are determining who is screened in, who passes. So you can see in figure 2, the proportion of good fit, people who match the good fit or the best fit scores, are screened in. And there are many who don't fit that are screened out. So it's sort of are we catching the true positives and the true negatives, and are we reducing false positives and false negatives? And what our research showed was when we calculated the odds ratio, so if we only relied on flipping a coin, the difference between flipping a coin and using our fit scores is we are 6.1 times more likely to catch and identify a best fit candidate using our screening assessment. On the question of faster recruiting, we know that time is money and getting people in positions matters, and you need to do it quickly. Hiring managers are desperate sometimes to fill roles and do that quickly. Across all 4 job families, we found that time to fill role was reduced by 3 days overall. So it went from 20.6 days to 17.6 days. And we hypothesize about why would that be. One of the ways that we think time is being saved is this confidence factor. So when hiring managers see a report based upon input they provided about what's important, us sharing with them a benchmark and where somebody met or deviated from that benchmark, they feel more confident in making that decision. I also think that there's some confidence boost on the part of the candidates. If you can imagine back to applying for your first positions, when people take an interest in you and they spend more time with you and they learn more details about who you are, what you're good at, you're going to feel more attended to and more confident that they've already shown that they're going to measure what you're good at and pay attention to sort of where your best fit is. So I think that there might have also been some boost of confidence on the candidate's part. We saw that they were quicker to accept a job after it was offered. Lastly, in the outcomes research, for those of you who are thinking of drinks, we looked at turnover. Now, we know that sometimes turnover is okay. If you don't have great people, you know, you're always okay letting some of the folks go that, you know, maybe weren't the best fit. But if we are in the business of getting better fits hired, we want to make sure that any turnover is happening is not regrettable turnover, that it's voluntary turnover. And then it becomes the job of the company to find ways to design the jobs and design the career paths to retain their best talent. So the interesting thing here is when we used the KF40 assessment, with this client, we had data where we had been sourcing candidates for them before we used the assessment, and then we also had candidates where we were using the assessment, so we were able to compare. We saw only 18% involuntary turnover when we used the assessment. And that's compared, just to give you a sense, that's compared to a national average for US call centers of 74%. I'm just going to check my numbers here. Yep. So on average for US call centers, they're seeing a 74% involuntary turnover. And with our assessment, that was just 18% at our client. So they're beating the odds. But we didn't stop there. We also looked at what was the profile of employees who stayed and employees who left. So if you see figure 2, the profiles, they showed a significant pattern, that these were statistically significant patterns. And so what the point here is that those who had to be terminated or were involuntary turnovers, they look different than the other employees who stayed or voluntarily left. And so what we were able to do is go back into our fit scores and adjust. So we're able to dial up or dial down the things that are important and matter most for success in these particular situations. So just a couple of final thoughts, and I'll ask Trish too if she wants to weigh in on anything here. But you know, we know that oftentimes some of our methods in selection are no better than a coin flip. And so when we're doing that and we know, gosh, I just feel like I'm taking a chance, we don't feel confident about our decisions. So I think that the talent intelligence engine of the Korn Ferry 4 dimensions of leadership and talent really show how we can use predictive analytics before we even reach out and make the offer. And that is, hopefully, will lead to an increase of that confidence score. Trish, would you add anything?
Yeah, I'd just add that we did this research with, as Evelyn mentioned, a very large security provider, about 15,000 employees in North America, and that sample base was tens of thousands of candidates and about, I think, 2,000 odd hires.
Almost 2,000 hires, yeah.
That's only one of the clients we've obviously used this tool with, but it's certainly ending up in business impact. What we're seeing, as Evelyn mentioned, is that real reduction in turnover. We're really slashing involuntary turnover. We're able to improve the hiring cycle, which obviously leads to a multi-million-dollar saving for that organisation in terms of costs around talent acquisition. And we're zeroing in on the fit, and that ultimately leads to a better quality of hire. So it's not about just measuring those results at the end around cost per hire, time to fill, turnover, etc. It's really about focusing on the beginning of the recruitment cycle and putting measures in place to get the fit better, to get the quality better up front, so that we end up with a great hiring decision that a manager can stand by and a candidate can stand by.
Great. Thank you all so much.